Hey y'all, thanks for joining us for another episode of 911 Delta, Tethered for Life. This podcast may not be suitable to all listeners due to language and subject matters. Please listen with care. Hey y'all, welcome to another episode of 911 Delta, Tethered for Life. I'm your host, Anna.
Hey, Casey.
And tonight we have another special guest, another firefighter, Brandon.
How y'all doing?
Good. He's going to talk about discussing the transition from working as a dispatcher to now being a career firefighter in the field. And last week, we had another firefighter who was my brother.
I enjoy talking to him.
Yeah?
Yeah, he sounds like a lot of fun.
Oh, he's fun, all right. Yeah. And we talked about how not to be useless during winter and be stuck out in the snow or calling 911 from your house when your power's out.
Don't do that. Call the electric company.
That was our fun with winter tips.
How was your week?
I don't know.
Kiddos better?
Yes. But
Good.
then it kind of cycled back around to me and I just kind of feel, yeah. So I don't know.
Well, that's not good.
Yeah, but it's a
I had a
short
pretty
week.
good week too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm in vacation mode already.
Oh, that's right. You go on vacation Sunday, right?
Yes.
And we go to Boston on Thursday, so
Oh, that's cool.
yeah.
For the game.
Right. So Brandon, what about you? What kind of schedule do you guys work?
So I'm on 4-day right now. We do the pretty normal 24 on, 24 off, 24 on, 24 off, 24 on, 4 days off.
Right.
Whew.
It beats 12s. It beats 12s.
I agree. I think that's the best. I really think that's the best schedule. I mean, my husband's worked a lot of them, and that schedule is so easy to manipulate and do what you want to do and get time off. That's what I think. I don't know. I don't know what you firefighters think. I know my brother's the same way. He's like Matt. He's always like, working the system and getting his time off and doing all that. So
yeah, it works out really well.
Yeah, I feel like it's the easiest schedule to do that with.
So tell us about yourself, Brandon.
Well, I've been a firefighter for going on 15 years, between career and volunteer. I started started my dispatch career in a call center for a private medical transport company, got promoted up into dispatch, and then eventually made it up to their communications director for the whole state of Virginia, before switching over into 911. I started in a small center, was there for 3 years, banished to night shift, was their primary fire rescue dispatcher and primary fire rescue trainer, before leaving there and going to a bigger center. Did some time on day shift and night shift, and I prefer night shift. Then, just with my kids being born and everything, needed to change the schedule up and decided to go back out in the field as a firefighter. And now I'm firefighter medic. So
awesome. Well, we're glad that you're with us.
I'm happy to be here. I love the podcast. I think y'all are doing good work on getting the knowledge out there and informing the people.
Well, we're trying. 1 week at a time.
That's right. One week at a time, it takes a while.
Yeah.
So
regardless, we're enjoying it. So
exactly. We're having fun doing it, but so in sticking with that theme, we were going to talk about call processing this week and how we talked last week about how things get priorities and how that's a little bit different on fire and law enforcement side. But I think a lot of people wonder why we do things a certain way, like with fire and EMS. Like, why do some calls get a fire engine and an ambulance. Some calls get 4 fire trucks, like instead of just one.
So, where I currently work, we very rarely have BLS transport units. So usually there's always a medic. Um, but it's also kind of weird because we only have one 24/7 staffed engine. The other two stations are cross staffed, the engine and the medic. Um, so usually your only calls that you're going to get an engine on is anything that's going to be life safety, auto accidents, fires, anything like that, or something where you're going to need a lot of hands like CPRs, um, technical rescues, anything like that. We also have an EMS supervisor that can upgrade any unit if they're not, at the paramedic level, that can jump on and provide those skills if needed. And they're usually used as like the first response or the added unit instead of adding engines for the higher level of care. The only other time you'll see an engine is like if the first due medic unit's out and there's a call in their first due, the engine will run it so that there's somebody on scene providing care before the medic unit gets there from another due.
Yeah, I always find it interesting because I started dispatching in a smaller jurisdiction, and that was kind of how they do it. It's kind of still how they still do it. And as the jurisdictions get bigger, it's like they want to put more pieces on the road when I feel like sometimes you don't need to. So I always find that interesting. It's like in a smaller place, we can go ahead and handle this with a medic unit and maybe an EMS supervisor or, somebody in a buggy. Doesn't have to be a supervisor. Where I grew up, it was all volunteer, but it was a huge rescue squad. And, we very rarely had a medic. Was, running BLS all the time. So it's interesting to me how different places
Mm-hmm.
do it. And I
Yeah,
think people get confused sometimes, like you said, if they, if your medic unit's out and you send the engine, people are like, why are you sending me a fire truck? I need an ambulance. Calm down,
yeah,
right? Um, and two, in a lot of the larger jurisdictions, the engines will have a medic on them. Not all the time, but a lot of times they do have a medic on the engine. So, not the case always in smaller jurisdictions, but at least they are EMTs or BLS trained providers so that they can, I think, at least give people peace of mind. Although when people see the fire truck, they don't always feel that way. They're like, what? My house isn't on fire.
Yeah, they definitely
yeah.
don't
Mainly,
get that.
mainly coming for, like I said, a higher level of care, or if extra hands are needed, just depending on the call type, or first due medic units out and somebody else is coming and it's going to be a minute. So get somebody there to start providing care.
Now, especially where you are now, and because I'm familiar with the area, obviously, because I live in the area, like, do you guys run lights and sirens to every call since you're further away from the hospital?
Yeah, it's funny between the last jurisdiction that I dispatched for and where I'm currently in the field. It's kind of like I went a little bit back in time. They expect us to respond lights and sirens to everything, um, even calls that don't necessarily need that kind of response. And whoever's in charge of the unit, whether it's the officer right at the seat of the engine or the AIC on the medic unit, can choose to downgrade and go en route. It kind of leaves it up to us. Where I know with the other jurisdiction there that the CAD kind of provides that designation.
Yeah,
Um, so for us, it's just up to whoever's on the unit whether we respond or not, and you have to be able, obviously, use your best judgment,
right.
be able to justify why you did one or the other.
Cool.
And who gets do you guys have like what's the right question? A protocol for, because I know it gets tricky when you say like if the medic unit's out and you want somebody to get there to provide care. Is that a dispatcher discretion or is there a SOP or something
So
in writing that says what they're supposed to do?
So they have policy in dispatch to if the first two medic unit is out to add a first responder from that company. Um, so even if we're cross staffing, at my station, our minimum is three people, so it's two on the medic unit, and there's one person left behind, and they will first respond in a buggy to anything in the first two if we're out.
Interesting.
Yeah. Cool. What do you think that you took from dispatch to the field? Sorry.
Definitely, definitely an appreciation for what goes on behind the scenes and what goes on upstairs. People, especially people in the field who've never been inside the center or interacted that much with dispatch other than throughout the performance of their duties. They don't know how hard that job is, and I don't think a lot of people realize that. So definitely an appreciation for everything that does go on up there. CAD knowledge, being able to work through our MDTs, get information on past calls if we've been to this house before, what to expect, looking for CAD flags or anything like that to try and keep everybody safe. I kind of took the knowledge of, hey, I know where this tab is. I can get this information before it's provided, or because I know they're busy or whatever. And multitasking. Dispatching built up my multitasking skills so that I'm able to do so many different things at once in the back of a medic unit or on a fire engine, whatever the job is at hand. I can always be looking at what I'm supposed to be doing next, or perform multiple jobs at once in a way that I don't think I could before I did time in dispatch.
Ugh, that definitely, if you cannot multitask, dispatching is not for you.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like ADD's got to be a prerequisite to
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when you first get started, it is overwhelming, obviously, but like we had said in a previous episode, we have 5 CAD screens, so that's 5 computer screens. Sorry, the phone, the radio. I mean, it's just a lot. So,
yeah. What do you think? What kind of crazy questions do the firefighters and the EMTs come up with for dispatch? Like when they're like, "Oh, those mother truckers, what the fuck are they doing up there?" You
um,
know?
Most of the questions that seem to come up is it all comes back to kind of training. What kind of training are they receiving for, specifically for fire rescue radio? Where do they go to learn the terminology for like emergency medical dispatch? Where are they going to learn anatomy or the terms that we use? And then for fire dispatching, where are they going for training to run these mock fires? Are they operating, with the firemen? Are they going to our training burns or anything like that? It all kind of boils down to training, because you can tell the ones that have been doing this a while, the confidence, the cadence that they have over the radio, and then you can tell the new ones apart where something big comes out and they get rather jumpy on the radio or fast or high pitched. So that's what it always comes down to. It seems like is what kind of training they're receiving and where did they learn that? Where did they learn this? Stuff like that.
or someone like me who is a old person from dispatch, but didn't know much about fire radio. God, I used to stress so fucking much on that radios. God.
Well,
But I knew if I was sitting with Brandon, Anna, or Mike, I was good to go.
it's hard. It's a hard if you're not used to the lingo, it can be hard to know it. I mean, I didn't when I started dispatching, I started an agency where we just dispatched fire rescue, and I had done some volunteer EMS, but I had not spent a lot of time with fire. I mean, we did like extrications with the fire department, but they were separate because the fire department was career where I grew up, and EMS was volunteer. So it was, I didn't have a whole lot of fire knowledge, and I was lucky in that the person who trained me was very good and taught me a lot of things. Plus, I also worked with a guy who was a firefighter as well. And then I married a firefighter. And then, you know, it's from there on, it's kind of like things that my family, like we've been using military time and the phonetic alphabet since I was a kid. Like my parents used to spell words like that when we were little, so we didn't know what they were saying, so we learned really quick. So all that to me is like normal. And so now it's like fire talk is normal too. And you have to realize that other people don't know what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like Casey, they'll be like, "What?" And I know training people. It was really, really hard. I will never forget one of my besties after I trained her, and I don't think she was a supervisor at this point, but she was a very competent dispatcher. She sends me a text message one night. It's like, I don't know, 10, 11 o'clock at night. What's an FDC? What? Oh gosh. But it's that lingo. And I think I'm really pro that dispatch should train with fire rescue. I think it's also true for law enforcement, although I don't really want to do that because I don't really want to be out there dealing with people like that. But I do think it's beneficial as a dispatcher to have that experience. And I think the same is true for fire rescue, but it just doesn't happen. Like, I know in some jurisdictions, they require you to do a ride along. You're not going to learn all the fire lingo
Mm-mm.
in a day, you know?
Yeah, one of the best things you can do, to become a really good fire dispatcher is, build a relationship with those guys in the field. You know, communicate with them not just on the radio, but whether you know calling each other after calls, get some closure on calls, because I know that was a big thing for dispatches. So you're there for the initial, but you don't always know the outcome.
Yeah.
A lot of the fire guys would be very willing to share what we can, on how things went, but building that relationship and then you know, training with the fire guys, whether it's burns or, mock calls, anything like that, training with them and learning the rhythm. Because even the big calls like house fires, there's a rhythm that it goes through. The build up to actual extinguishment to overhaul. And if you can find that rhythm and be able to anticipate it because you've been working with them or you've trained with them through those scenarios, then you'll be able to be on the ball and know what they're going to ask for next. It That anticipation removes a lot of the stress and a lot of the time delay from those kind of calls. And you're right, it's the training between communications and fire, there seems to be some kind of gap there. And I feel like if those two entities could learn to work together, things could get a lot easier.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I
And
think
I
that was
know,
half of my problem was I was never really trained that well.
right. And like and this was true, it's not so true now that where we worked has grown. And there's all it's all career, and there's just a few volunteers left. But where I started and when that jurisdiction back in the day when we still had a lot of volunteers, and they were doing things like cross staffing. It was important. I always thought it was important anyway for the dispatchers to know like what capabilities different pieces of equipment have. And for instance, when you're going to single pull a station, what are you going to single pull? Like, if I would back in the day, I might have four stations that were doing a single pull, and to and if a fire came out in one of them, that could make three of them be on the run card for that, right? So you have to know, like, okay, well, who's going to take, you know, the first three are probably going to take the engines. So you need to get three more ambulances from somewhere else because you're not going to have any. And, all of that was really, I felt like that was hard to train and people didn't know, how they were going to think in that situation. Whereas now with the computer and everything being more automated, and people aren't necessarily getting that type of training. And then the system shits out and then people are like, well, what do I do now?
Right. I
You know,
mean, in my jurisdiction, with the few stations that we have, a house fire assignment is, for us, it's three engines, two tankers, two medics, a battalion, and a supervisor. Well, two of those stations are cross-staffed.
right.
You're gonna get one engine. You're gonna get one engine, but then who's bringing tankers? Who's bringing
Right.
the medics? So it's being able to train with your guys and know where in the county that's going to be, and being able to anticipate who's going to pull what. You're already building your next assignment. So when you retone, you know who you're calling for what. And without that communication and training, it's always a surprise. You never know what you're going to get when you hit the tones.
This gives me such fucking anxiety just talking about this. Holy shit.
Oh my gosh.
I'm just like, oh God, I'm waiting for the phone to ring. Like, please don't be a fire cop. Please don't be a fire cop.
Oh man. Brandon and I could probably talk about this all night, but
I know y'all sound so great.
uh and one of the funniest things. So my husband does some training usually with some departments down south um in North Carolina. And I was like, oh, I can go. It's kind of like a little vacay, right? And I'll, have a couple days at the beach, even though they always do in the winter. It's cold as hell, but it's fine, right? It's a few days away from home and everything. And so the first time I went down there, and one of the chiefs and I are friends, so I kind of rolled up to see what was happening. And I think it was the last day, so we probably had to check out of our little bungalow anyway. And so I was like, oh, I'll go over there and see what's happening. And she's on the radio, like doing radio traffic. And she sees me and she's like, hey, you want to play dispatcher? And I'm like, uh, okay. Well, it was fun. We did have fun, but it was a different experience because number one, and I know this, like cognitively, I know this, but when you're so used to being able to press the foot pedal and talk as opposed to using a portable, um, that was number one. And then challenge number two was that it's a little bit different, because they're from North Carolina. It's more volunteers. So it was a little, so it took us probably, I don't know, 10 minutes or so to like get into that rhythm and they were putting, groups through a live burn. So it was like probably by the time we got to the third group, I was like, okay, now I got it. Now I can push the button, talk, and like do the whole thing. But it was funny. And I thought, this is good though. Like it's good to do this and keep growing, even though sometimes we get comfortable doing what we're doing, Casey.
Yeah, I'll take that patrol radio any day. Sorry, fire
No.
guys.
Oh no.
Sorry.
Nope. You keep law enforcement, keep it to yourself.
I know. And I feel like I say that like, oh, we should keep growing, but I don't want to do that. But yeah, it's fine.
So, Brandon, do you think dispatching as opposed to now working out in the field hold the same level of stress, or is it different, do you think?
it it's a whole lot different. I feel like when I was in dispatch, especially on day shift, night shift not so much, but day shift was, from the time I, took turnover and sat down in the chair, it was like stress for 12 hours. Just
Yep.
because there's always something happening, always stuff to figure out. night shift was a little more low key than that, but like now, we're at the station training, going through our day and everything, and you run a call, and obviously that call can be a high stress event, but it's not constant. So it doesn't last the same. It doesn't weigh on you the same amount of time that being in dispatch did, at least for me. Um, so I would say it's a little less stressful, in my opinion.
I was not expecting that.
Well, it's funny. Like Brandon said, when you're sitting in the chair, you're kind of stuck there. And we talked about this, I think when we were talking with M, but like, even though they say, oh, get up when you need to, or take a break, or, we all know that's bullshit.
Yeah.
In the stations, and my husband's been in a lot of them, that, like I remember we laughed about one of them, they had this set, like, it was personal development time, you know, and like you had 2 hours to do whatever the hell you wanted to do, basically. Now, obviously, if a call came out, you had to go to it, but that was like 2 hours out of the day where, you did whatever. Like if somebody was taking a class, getting their degree or whatever, they could do that. You could go work out. Whatever you wanted to do, it was your time. For 2 hours out of your workday. Now I get that you're working 24 hours, but still, should they keep you in dispatch for 24 hours and not feel bad about not giving you no pee break? You know?
Yeah, I
So
mean, it's
That's
it's
true.
not like, not like we're just, hanging out on the sofa for 24 hours. Like there's always
right.
stuff going on, but the difference I think is like we get dispatched to a call in the field, mainly on the medical side. Fire side is more of a, you're going to get dispatched to something, but there's always going to be something either out of the ordinary or something that can't really be described, via the radio. But like you get a medical call, you know what you're going to, you know what you're going for. You have your set of protocols that you're going to have to follow to treat this patient, and your focus is on that one patient, or that one emergency. In dispatch, especially with the larger jurisdiction, you're dealing with all of them and trying to keep track of those units and what their needs are and trying to make sure that your CAD notes are right. All the while, the phone's still ringing and people are still calling in emergencies that you're trying to get dispatched. So I feel like the fire rescue being in the field, the stress is more focused in that moment with that one call. Where dispatch, it's just constant because you're being flooded.
That's a good way to put that.
Yeah.
So, any advice to folks that are thinking about becoming a dispatcher?
Be able to type, be able to multitask, be thick skinned. A lot of these people that call in, you know, you're a voice on the other end of the phone. They can't see you. There's no consequences for the way that they speak to you. People get nasty, and you can't take it to heart. If somebody's in a high emotional situation, if they're having an emergency, or even if they're mad about something, you know, don't take it to heart. Do your best you can to calm them down and move on. Never stop learning. It's the public safety environment. There's always something to learn, always a new skill to pick up. Um, they always joke that the moment you say, I've learned enough, is probably the moment you should step away, because this job is so fluid and changes every day.
Yep, that's really good advice.
Yeah.
Or just don't do it. I'm just kidding. I'm just
Oh,
kidding.
somebody's got to.
Yes.
So we kind of covered it a little bit, but how do you maintain your sanity? And then what do you think is different between how you do that now as compared to how you did it when you worked in dispatch? Like, what can you give any dispatcher people advice?
Work life balance is the biggest part of it. And it's something I kind of lacked when I was in dispatch. And one of the reasons that I ended up leaving was, you know, being, I was on night shift. I did a little short stint on day shift, but night shift essentially for 5 years. Um, and my son was born when I switched jurisdictions, and when he's awake, when he was awake and my wife was awake, I was sleeping because I had to work that night. And then my daughter was born, and it was more of the same. Um, being able to, when you leave work, leave it at work and come home and have that completely separate is incredibly important. And it's not something that you can just do. It's a skill that you have to learn. And it's really hard to do at first. But as for now, with us working 24-hour shifts and I come home and I have the full day, I'm able to maintain that balance so much better than I could in dispatch. And with the wonky schedules that dispatch had us on, um, you know, it was hard to communicate to loved ones whether you're going to work, you're coming from work, when you do work. Hey, I've got overtime this day. Hey, I'm on call this day. It was always pretty tough.
Again, I don't miss those days. Whew, not at all. So, what are some things that folks should not call 911 for the fire EMS side?
Y'all went over a couple of them last week, if I recall correctly. But your power being out. Um, Please don't call 911 for your power being out. We didn't know any more than you do. And we do the same thing you could do and call the power company. Um, Cats and trees.
Oh, yeah.
Common misconception that we'll come get a cat out of a tree.
Yep.
Probably not. And then special events, especially this time of year, because I know a lot of jurisdictions do, like Santa Claus or fire truck, or there's parades through a lot of jurisdictions. Please don't call 911 and ask information on these special events. If you absolutely have to call, look up a non-emergency number, or, if it's involving the fire department, call the firehouse. The dispatchers are busy dealing with emergencies, and if one of those events is going on, probably coordinating with other people on the ground working with those. But call the firehouse directly, or look on social media. Don't call 911 for that.
Yes, and do not be ungrateful that this is happening and they don't come down your damn street.
Yeah.
Like, shut the hell up. Like, you're lucky that they're even willing to do that anyways. Like, that shit. I seen that on Facebook and that shit pissed me off.
Yeah, I used to coordinate the Santa on a fire truck there for a few years, and the
Unreal.
amount of hate mail and comments and everything. Oh, you didn't come down my street. Well, it's like, well, you live at the end of a cul-de-sac. So
Well, yeah, people are just
Yeah, and with this day and age, a lot of the places post their schedule, or some of them even have apps like you can track Santa. I mean, for God's sake, put your kids in the car. Don't complain about Santa. God, that makes me angry too. I'm like,
yeah.
One thing that always has kind of stuck with me since I left dispatch was the types of callers that you get. You get the callers that are hysterical and explaining a situation, on the fire side. Law enforcement's obviously different for taking calls, but on the fire side, you get these people who call in like about auto accidents, and they will describe the end of the world to you. And fire rescue gets on scene; it's a fender bender with no injuries. But I've always found with the auto accidents or injury calls, the people who are very calm in that moment, that's when you need to worry. Those are going to be your big calls. The people who just monotone, tell you what's going on, answer all of your questions. Those are the ones that's like you need to send the world to.
Yes. Thank you, Brandon. Those are the people that scare you. You're like, whoa. Whoa.
Yep.
If they answer that first question, like they just give their address right away, I'm like, whoa. Something's not good here. because and is this true in where you are now that you will get a million calls for that fender bender, but you only get one for the vehicle up in a tree and 6 people hanging out of it?
Right. Yeah. No, you're, yeah.
Yeah, I don't I
We'll
guess
get,
people are like, oh, somebody already called for sure.
right.
But there's a
Yeah.
vehicle in a tree.
We'll get a
You know?
100 calls for a simple fender bender at an intersection, but then, you know, we've had it where a deputy will roll up on that bad auto accident and call it in, but nobody else did.
Right, right.
It's
And yeah, meanwhile there's traffic going by that. I don't understand that either. It's interesting. Interesting phenomenon with people. And I think before we move on, Case, I just thought about this. We talked about earlier when we were talking about how they run calls and stuff. We talked about a couple different terms, or we mentioned them, and we should probably like give people an idea of what we were talking about, because a lot of people don't know, you
Well, I
know.
think you and Brandon should definitely do that.
Um so I was thinking about when I was thinking, I'm like, man, Brandon said something about the AIC on the ambulance. So who is that person?
so the AIC, the attendant in charge, it's usually the highest level of care person on the unit. They are the ones in charge of that unit. They make the decisions on, like we were talking about, responding in and out, going lights and sirens or not. They're the ones that are going to be making those decisions and talking on the radio. So it's like your officer in charge for an engine, attendant in charge for a medic unit.
Right. And the officer on the engine is usually not driving.
Right. So they ride front right seat.
They're a shotgun.
Yep. They get you know, they have the MDT, they've got all the map books. They're getting the information from dispatch that drivers just concentrate on driving, getting everybody to the scene as safely as they can and navigating some of these roadways where traffic decides not to move and whatnot. So
The
Yeah.
officer is the one who pushes that horn pedal, right?
that can vary. There's pedals on both sides, but
Burr,
yeah,
burr.
yeah, between the officer and the driver, they discuss who makes noise. And usually, yeah, it's the officer that's doing that.
How about that little swirly thing on the front of the fire truck?
The federal queue, yeah, that's
Sure.
usually the officer. That's usually the officer. It's a foot pedal. The driver's probably using a pull cord for the air horn. Coordinate with one another. But
I
yeah,
love
both
that
seats they
swirly
make a
thing.
bunch of noise. Swirly thing.
See, we should really have Casey asking the questions, because the swirly thing is perfect. Oh my God, the swirly thing.
Always think of me now when you see that.
Yep. Matt used to, when he was in a smaller jurisdiction where they're primarily staffed ambulances, he rode with this, and they would usually have two medics on a crew. And he rode with this kind of big guy. And for whatever reason, where the foot pedal was, he had this habit of stepping on it as he was getting out of the ambulance. And Matt swears, I mean, he's like deaf anyway, from the sirens all these years, but he swears that that's one reason, because he's like, you don't know how many times I would get out and I'd be right at the front of the ambulance and he would step on that damn pedal and it would blare in my ear. And he's like, I cussed him so many times.
Oh my gosh.
And the funniest thing about it is, like, just me here, like, because he's one of those people that I'm sure he jumped, like it scared the shit out of him and he jumped. And so, like, can you imagine, like, I just imagine him like getting out, trying to be Mr. Professional, and then hear this freaking horn. And
That's exactly why I'm laughing so
picture this, right?
because now that I work with him, it's like
Right. You can picture this, like, oh my gosh. Yeah.
Maybe I should take an air horn into work and be like, "Burr, burr,"
Oh, you should. You
just to see
should.
the reaction.
Oh my God.
That would be great.
Yeah. And then we also talked about cross staffing and or single pulling a station. They can uh, some jurisdictions use them interchangeably, but to me, cross staffing is when you've got two fire trucks, and you decide which one you want to take for what. What do you think, Brandon?
Right. So, like my station, we have a tanker, an engine, and a medic unit. And my crew, we have the personnel to be able to respond in the engine and the medic unit. But say somebody's off or something, and we drop to our minimum, then all three units are up for grabs. We're primarily on the medic unit, but depending on what the call type is and whose due it's in, a decision has to be made by the officer on which piece we're going to get in and go in.
Right.
So that's cross staffing. Is you have a crew there, but they're on all three units, just depending on what needs to go.
Right. And that's where the term single pull comes from, because like you're only pulling one piece, right?
Right.
Now some places they would do they might two people might take the medic unit and one person might take the tanker if your tanker can operate that way. But all these things are really jurisdictionally dependent. So it's important for people to just understand that there's a wide range of how public safety does things, that it's not the same everywhere.
Right. And
Right?
it's important to, you know, um, be informed on how your public safety agency, wherever you reside, does things. Then if you see a fire truck pull up with an ambulance, you may know why. And a lot of the guys will answer those questions too. If you ask them, hey, you know, I see you have this many people here. What would you take? You know, it's important to be informed on that certain thing. And then also, if you're reside in a jurisdiction where they do have cross staffing, kind of like my current station is, you know, maybe talking to your elected officials and getting more personnel. Single pulling, or pulling an engine as a driver only to a call is incredibly dangerous.
Right.
um, just going by yourself and trying to pull a hose line and pump the truck at the same time, not to mention you know maneuvering that big piece of apparatus to get there with only one set of eyes is very dangerous. So if you find that you reside in a jurisdiction like that and want to get involved, talk to your elected officials about getting more personnel in these trucks.
One thing I want to bring up too is people, if you're calling 911 and you tell that dispatcher, don't come with the sirens or sirens, then bitch, get off my phone. You don't have an emergency. Get in your
Yes,
car and go then. Like,
the
no.
requesting a silent run.
A
Yes.
silent run. Yeah.
And that just depends on the jurisdiction. I mean, we can let them know that you're requesting that, but that doesn't mean that's not going to happen or that
I,
will happen.
yeah, I will say that depending on time of day and where it is,
Right.
Yeah.
if you ask, it's most likely not going to happen. So.
Yeah.
Right. And people don't realize, I mean, you do have protocols for, for instance, in the middle of the night running through a neighborhood.
Right, frowned upon.
Right. Even if you are going to a priority level call, you still don't need to blare up the whole neighborhood. Most agencies have that much common sense.
Right.
Now, but people feel they need to tell you, oh, I don't want to wake up the neighbors. Well, then don't freaking call. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, they're traffic warning devices. So if there's no traffic in a neighborhood, there ought not to be too much. There's no sense in that.
And I can tell you my husband's had, I think twice he's had once an engine and once an ambulance that had the diamond plating ripped off the sides of them in a neighborhood. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
the
because people are just, they don't, it's like they see the red lights and they got to go to the red light
Mm-hmm.
and
yeah,
they can't, instead of go away, they got to go to it.
it's definitely there's definitely been increases in instances of near misses or apparatus being struck. Not even neighborhood, interstate where you can see for
Oh, God,
miles and
yeah.
they're still getting hit.
Yeah.
Um, it's definitely something to pay attention to with the move over, slow down laws. Um,
Yes. Move over, people. Jesus.
Yes. Years ago, this is when I was working full-time nights. We had like a chain reaction. I think it was when they were, I don't know if they were repaving 95 or what they were doing, construction. And it was on the southern end and it was a chain reaction accident. Well, it it wasn't none of them were like major, right? I think maybe one person got transported to the hospital, whatever. Everybody clears up, but VDOT had been out there. So the Department of Transportation truck had been out there. They call them the big crash truck. It's got the thing in the back with the lights and the whatever. So if you run into it, you just run into that. You don't do any damage to anything else. The guy is sitting on the side of the road, like the tow truck has just picked up the last vehicle. He calls and says, some lady just ran like full speed into the back. That was the worst accident of the night because she was trapped. Like because she had run like literally full speed into the back of this crash truck. What? With the
Mm.
yellow lights going and the what? Come
yeah.
on. I
I
don't I don't understand what you're doing, you know?
I mean, just was it last week, maybe 2 weeks ago? We were we were dispatched to an auto accident just up from the station and responded up there, and um, we had, I think there was 8 patients on the first one, so we were there for a minute waiting to get people
Holy
transported out and
crap.
everything. So we clear from that one, and not 3/4 of a mile down the road we get another. Um, so those major thoroughfares, accidents breed accidents. As
Oh
you
yeah.
increase the traffic, you increase the congestion, and just people lose their minds for some reason.
Yep.
Anything else you want to say, Brandon, while we have you on?
Kind of going on that advice thing, um, things that I've noticed being now in the field and then with some experience in dispatch. The big things to remember, don't be a button pusher. That dispatch intuition, good decision making, it can't be automated. It can't be replaced. That sense that you have, being with all the information that you have, utilize it. Don't let a computer tell you what's right and wrong. Um, and then for communicating with your guys in the field, it's the little things that make the biggest difference. If they're responding to a house fire in a jurisdiction, you have a map just like they have a map. Call that hydrant. Hey, there's a hydrant across the street from this house. You just saved that officer who's trying to get dressed, get his crew together, figure out their tactics. You just took one thing off his plate. That makes all the difference in the world. Those little things that you can do to um, help immensely. Um, and then build that relationship between fire rescue and dispatch. Whether it's with the top level of the jurisdiction, scheduling training between them, or you know whether you stop by the firehouse, introduce yourself. Hey, I'm a dispatcher. I work this shift. I'm going to be talking to y'all a lot. Just wanted to come down and meet y'all. Build that relationship, that working relationship between you two, and you'll start to be able to notice, the subtle things in your voice or their voice of what's going on, and then you'll be able to anticipate their needs while they're on calls. And again, that's one of those little things that really helps.
Well, shout out to everybody who's listening. And keep listening, keep liking, sharing, following. We got our little end of the year thing from Spotify, and apparently most of you are sharing us through text message, which is awesome. But you can share us on social media too. We don't mind. It's okay.
Not at all.
Yeah. And yeah, remember to subscribe because that helps us. And if you can leave a review, that helps too, because it helps other people, especially on Apple, apparently. If you leave a review on Apple Podcasts, it helps when people are searching to find it.
Well,
Awesome.
Brandon, we appreciate you being with us.
Can I do a shout out?
Absolutely, yes.
Able to. So I just want to give a shout out to Christy, one of the best dispatchers that I've ever had the pleasure of training. She's still one of my best friends, and achieving great things where she's at now. And then Amber, also one of my favorite dispatchers that I've ever worked with, achieving great things with her new jurisdiction as well.
Yeah. And
Absolutely.
are those
Thank you for
ladies
having me.
listening? They need to listen.
Yeah, I will reach out to them. I'm pretty sure they already are because we've talked about your podcast. So
Okay. Okay. Awesome. All right.
so, but
Awesome.
thank y'all for having me. I appreciate the
Yeah.
opportunity.
Thanks for coming on. And then Casey, what are we going to talk about next week?
Next week, we will be talking about the stressors. We'll be getting more in depth with that of dispatching and how we cope.
Because Casey's going to be on a cruise, actually. So
I
that's
am.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
going to be in the Bahamas. Woo! See you later. Till next
All right.
time, guys.
Talk to you guys later. Bye.
Bye.